They thought Willow Lane was safe if a quiet town where doors were left unlocked and children played freely under the fading streetlights. But safety was an illusion. One evening jog, one vanished girl, and one polite butcher with a smile too perfect would tear that illusion apart forever. What began as a missing persons case would unravel into a nightmare of secrets, blood, and a monster hiding in plain sight. This is the story of the Butcher of Willow Lane. Willow Lane had always been the kind of neighborhood where parents felt safe letting their children play outside until the streetlights flickered on. It was a quiet place, surrounded by maple trees, where everyone trusted each other and crime seemed like a problem for the city, not their little town. On the evening of August 14, 1992, 17-year-old Emily Carter laced up her bright red sneakers for her routine jog. She was the pride of her school, top of her class, captain of the track team, a girl with dreams that stretched far beyond the small town where she had grown up. Before stepping out, she leaned into the kitchen where her mother was finishing the dishes and said softly, "Half an hour, Mom. I'll be right back." Her mother remembered that moment with haunting clarity. Emily's ponytail bouncing as she jogged down the street, the headphones resting around her neck, the easy smile she gave the mailman, and the cheerful wave to Mrs. Green, who was watering her garden. Everything seemed so ordinary, and yet it was the last time anyone saw her alive. By 8 o'clock, when Emily hadn't returned, her mother tried to convince herself that she had stopped at a friend's house. By 9, panic began to take hold. She drove through the neighborhood, circling the park, the diner where teenagers often gathered, and even the school track, calling Emily's name into the night air. But there was no answer. At 10:15, she called the police, her voice trembling. "My daughter's gone. She should have been back hours ago. She never does this. Please, you have to help me." The search began immediately. Neighbors joined officers with flashlights, moving in long lines through the darkened woods. Volunteers waded into the creek with nets, while others combed through ditches and empty lots. The sound of her name echoed through the night. "Emily! Emily!" Sometime past midnight, 2 officers found something near the abandoned train tracks. It was Emily's sneakers, neatly placed side by side as though she had taken them off herself. The laces were undone, but there were no footprints leading away, no drag marks, nothing at all. Her trail simply ended. The next morning, the local newspaper ran the headline, "Willow Lane teen vanishes on evening jog." Reporters descended on the town, cameras flashing, while neighbors whispered in hushed voices about kidnappers and strangers. But inside the Carter home, none of that mattered. Emily's room remained untouched, her bed neatly made, her posters on the wall. Her mother sat at the edge of the bed for hours, holding Emily's pillow and repeating the same words over and over. She promised she'd be back. The disappearance of Emily Carter was like a crack running through the heart of Willow Lane. A town that once lived without fear suddenly found itself suffocated by suspicion. Parents no longer allowed their children to walk alone. Porch lights burned through the night, and every passing stranger was met with wary eyes. Detectives worked endlessly, knocking on doors, interviewing classmates, friends, and neighbors. Emily had no enemies, no secret boyfriend, no reason to run away. She was the kind of girl people described as bright, kind, and steady. But in a case like this, where there was no body and no clear motive, investigators were left chasing shadows. Whispers began to circulate through the community, and one name came up again and again: Martin Hale. He was the town's butcher, a man in his early 40s who had lived in Willow Lane most of his life. People had always found him polite but strangely distant, as though his kindness was rehearsed. He had divorced some years ago and now lived alone, spending most of his time in his small shop at the corner. Customers often remarked how he worked late, sometimes past midnight, the yellow glow of his shop spilling onto the empty street long after everyone else had gone to bed. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Accusing a neighbor of such a crime felt unthinkable. But as detectives pressed harder, details began to surface. A teenage boy named Ryan Miller admitted that on the night Emily vanished, he had spoken with her. She told him she was thirsty after her run and planned to stop at Hale's shop for a soda before heading home. That was the last conversation anyone ever had with her. Another woman recalled seeing Emily jogging past the butcher shop that same evening. And though she couldn't be sure, she swore she saw Martin Hale standing in the doorway watching. 2 days later, detectives went to question him. Hale opened the door in a blood-stained apron, casually wiping his hands with a rag. He smiled as if expecting them. "Evening, officers. What's all this about?" They asked if he'd seen Emily that night. His eyebrows lifted in practiced surprise. "That poor girl? Terrible business." "Yes. She's been in my shop before, of course. Candy soda." But that night, no, not at all. When asked why his shop lights burned so late, he chuckled, almost amused. "Mate doesn't clean itself. People like their cuts fresh in the morning. Someone has to put in the hours." There was no nervousness in his tone, no hesitation in his story. He spoke calmly, as though every word had been rehearsed. His record was spotless, his shop clean, with no evidence to hold him. The detectives had no choice but to leave. But the suspicion didn't fade. Mothers warned their daughters never to set foot near the butcher shop. Neighbors crossed the street rather than pass him on the sidewalk. His once busy business became almost empty overnight. And through it all, Martin Hale carried on exactly as before, sweeping his sidewalk in the mornings, nodding politely to the same people who now whispered about him, pretending not to notice the fear in their eyes. Nearly a year passed this way, a town frozen in fear and uncertainty. Then, one spring afternoon, the nightmare returned. Another young girl failed to make it home, and just like before, her trail led back toward Willow Lane. The town of Willow Lane had been holding its breath ever since Emily vanished. But when another girl disappeared the following spring, fear turned into something darker, certainty. People no longer spoke of kidnappers passing through or strangers on the highway. Everyone knew in their hearts that the danger lived among them. Her name was Megan Turner. 14 years old, shy and quiet. She had stayed late at the library one evening working on a school project. When she didn't return home, her parents called the police immediately. Officers retraced her steps, and once again, all signs led toward the same part of town, the stretch of road where Martin Hale's butcher shop stood like a silent sentinel. The investigation took a new urgency. Detectives were determined not to repeat the mistakes of Emily's case. They obtained a warrant and went back to Hale's shop, this time determined to search every inch. Hale greeted them with the same calm smile, as though he had been expecting them. Inside, the shop was cold and spotless. The glass counters gleamed, knives hung neatly from hooks, and the heavy scent of raw meat lingered in the air. It looked ordinary, even dull. But when the officers moved toward the back and pried open the cellar door, the atmosphere shifted. A sour, chemical smell drifted up, stronger than bleach. The cellar was dark, lined with crates and old equipment. Against one wall sat a heavy wooden chest, locked tight with a rusted padlock. After breaking it open, what lay inside froze the room into silence. Bundles of hair, tied neatly with ribbons, scraps of clothing folded carefully, a silver necklace, its pendant engraved with 2 simple letters, E.C. Emily Carter. The detectives exchanged grim looks. They photographed everything, bagged the items, and kept searching. On the cellar floor, under a layer of fresh cement, patches of reddish, brown stains seeped through. Testing later confirmed what they already feared: blood, human blood, scrubbed and hidden beneath the floorboards. The news spread like fire. Within hours, television vans crowded Willow Lane, their bright lights painting the quiet street in harsh color. Headlines screamed from every channel. The Butcher of Willow Lane arrested. The neighbors gathered outside the shop as Hale was led away in handcuffs. But instead of shouting or struggling, he lifted his chin and smiled at the flashing cameras. "You think you've got it all figured out? he murmured, almost to himself, his voice calm and chilling. For the first time since Emily vanished, the town felt relief. The monster had been caught, but no one was prepared for what came next, because the trial would reveal horrors far beyond what anyone had imagined. The trial of Martin Hale began in the summer of 1995, and from the very first day it was clear that this was no ordinary case. Reporters filled every seat in the courtroom, their cameras flashing as Hale was escorted in, his hands shackled but his expression unnervingly calm. To the families of Emily Carter and Megan Turner, it felt almost insulting. The way he carried himself like a man attending a business meeting, rather than one accused of murdering children. The prosecution wasted no time in painting him as a predator who hid behind the mask of a polite shopkeeper. They presented photographs of the cellar, the bundles of hair, the scraps of clothing. The jury visibly stiffened when Emily's necklace was shown, its tiny pendant engraved with her initials, glinting under the harsh courtroom lights. Forensic experts testified about the traces of blood discovered beneath the cellar floorboards. Though Hale had scrubbed and poured bleach over the surface, microscopic tests revealed what lay beneath. One doctor explained in chilling detail how the blood matched Emily Carter's DNA. Another expert described the skull fracture found on Emily's remains, consistent with the blunt end of a butcher's hammer. The defense fought back viciously. Hale's lawyer claimed the evidence was circumstantial, that the necklace could have been planted, that the so-called blood traces were the result of years of working with raw meat. He reminded the jury that no one had seen Hale commit the crime. No one could place him with the girls at the moment they vanished. This is a case built on fear and suspicion, the lawyer argued. And suspicion is not proof. But then came the journals. Detectives had recovered them from Hale's apartment. Leather, bound books filled with obsessive, fragmented writing. When the prosecutor began to read passages aloud, the courtroom fell silent. Mate must be fresh. Innocence preserved in silence. Bones tell no lies. The words were disjointed, unsettling, but they painted a picture more damning than any piece of physical evidence. Hale sat expressionless as they were read, his eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. Witnesses were called, too. Ryan Miller, now visibly shaken after years of guilt, testified about his last conversation with Emily, telling the jury how she mentioned stopping at Hale's shop. A woman broke down in tears on the stand as she recalled an evening when Hale had offered her young daughter free candy after hours, an invitation she thankfully declined. But perhaps the most devastating moment came when Emily's mother was handed her daughter's necklace in court. Her sobs filled the room as she clutched it to her chest, whispering her daughter's name. Even hardened reporters turned their faces away. Despite all this, Hale never flinched. Through weeks of testimony, he sat silently, occasionally smiling faintly at something no one else could see. He never confessed, never lost his composure, and when he finally chose to speak, his words sent a chill through everyone present. "I sell meat," he said softly. "Not people." The jury would decide if they believed him. When the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Families clutched each other's hands, reporters whispered into recorders, and Martin Hale sat still as stone, staring at the empty jury box as though he already knew their answer. For 6 long hours, the town of Willow Lane waited. When the jury finally returned, the foreman's voice was steady but cold. The jury find the defendant, Martin Hale, guilty of murder in the 1st degree. A gasp swept through the room. Emily Carter's mother collapsed into tears. Her daughter's necklace clutched so tightly in her fist that it cut into her skin. Megan Turner's father, who had sat silent through the trial, closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank God." Hale did not flinch. Not when the sentence was read, not when the gavel struck. He simply rose to his feet as the guards pulled him toward the door, a faint smile curling at his lips. And just before he disappeared from sight, he spoke in a calm, almost conversational tone. There are more graves out there. You'll never find them all. The words struck the courtroom like a hammer blow. Reporters scrambled to write them down, the families shuddered in horror, and detectives exchanged alarmed looks. In the days that followed, search teams scoured the woods around Willow Lane, digging, probing, looking for any trace of other victims. They found nothing, but the doubt lingered. Had Hale been taunting them, or confessing to something far worse? The butcher shop was closed permanently, its windows boarded, its door padlocked. For years it stood like a rotting wound at the corner of the street, the paint peeling, the sign faded. Children dared each other to run up and touch the door at night, swearing they could hear faint metallic clanging from inside, the echo of knives on steel, the hum of an invisible freezer still running in the dark. Emily Carter was buried on a hill overlooking Willow Lane, her grave covered in flowers that never seemed to stop coming. On the day of her funeral, her mother said quietly to the crowd, "At least now she can rest. But my heart never will." Megan Turner's family moved away from the town within the year, unable to bear the constant reminder of the streets that had swallowed their daughter. As for Martin Hale, he spent the rest of his life behind bars, refusing to speak of his crimes, refusing to admit guilt, carrying his secrets into the shadows of his cell. To some, his silence was proof that he had only killed the 2 girls. To others, it was evidence of a man hiding horrors too great to confess. The case of the Butcher of Willow Lane remains one of the darkest chapters in the town's history. A story of trust shattered, of innocence stolen, and of evil hiding in plain sight, behind a polite smile and a blood-stained apron. Even now, decades later, the people of Willow Lane remember. They keep their doors locked. They warn their children not to stray too far. And when they pass the abandoned shop, they lower their voices, haunted by the memory of the man who once stood behind its counter, weighing meat, and watching the world with eyes that saw people as something else entirely. Evil doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it hides behind a friendly nod, a clean apron, and a smile you've seen 1,000 times before. The Butcher of Willow Lane proved that monsters don't just live in dark alleys or distant cities. They can stand across the counter, shake your hand, and ask how your day is going. Emily Carter and Megan Turner's names are remembered as the lives stolen too soon, but the shadow of Martin Hale lingers as a reminder trust can be deadly, and safety is never guaranteed. In the end, Willow Lane never truly healed. It simply learned to live with its ghosts.